Can you all see the slide now that I have up? Great. Okay, great. Shazia, unless you have any concerns, maybe we can go ahead and start. So welcome everyone. This is a panel on data collection and analysis, especially highlighting innovative partnerships and the engagement of local organizations around the world. I'm Rudabeh Kishi. I'm Director of Research and Innovation at ACLED. And I wanted to start today with sharing a little bit of background first on ACLED, especially our sourcing and information collection, especially for those of you who might not be familiar with the work that we do. And then I'll hand things over to some of my colleagues who are joining us from a number of different organizations around the world, from Dialogos that works in Guatemala, from ADHRB working on Bahrain, from WANEP working in Sierra Leone, and COCAP in Nepal. And they'll each do the same, speaking about the various challenges that each of them are facing in their data collection work, with hopes that we will keep presentations tight enough so that we can leave some time for Q&A in the end. So for those less familiar with ACLED, we're the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project. We collect data on political violence and demonstrations around the world in near real time. We were originally an academic project, but we're now an independent NGO. But this means that we come from a background of rigorous and robust methodology. We have always been a fully remote organization, even before COVID forced everyone else to be. So we have no brick and mortar office, especially because we found that that really helps us to benefit from being able to build a team of researchers that are based around the world with local language knowledge, local context knowledge. So we collect information, like I mentioned, on political violence and demonstrations, with new data updated weekly. These are published on Mondays and Tuesdays based on regions and time zones, and are freely accessible to the public. So anyone can register for a free account, and then you can access the data through our data export tool, as well as an API call, and you can access all that through our website that's listed on the slide. Then in addition to the data that we make available weekly, we also have research and analysis that are accessible as well. So these include weekly regional overviews that offer a quick snapshot of latest ongoings in each region. We have in-depth reports, including reflective pieces, quick snapshots, actor profiles, infographics, and more, including special projects and initiatives like our new early warning research hub, for example, that we formally launched last week. ACLED's an event-based data set. That means that information that we collect is quite granular. We code by the specific day and the specific location. We include geo-coordinates for mapping, spatial analysis, and also by a specific engagement, which in turn means that information can be very flexible to accommodate a wide range of levels of analysis, from local dynamics all the way to country year level. We cover a wide range of disorder with broad event types, including various forms of violence, demonstrations, strategic developments. We include information on a wide variety of groups and actors, as well as fatality estimates. And I'll also note that we track gang violence too in certain Latin American countries, where such violence we view as akin to political violence, given the way in which it challenges public security and the state's monopoly on power. Our coverage currently covers the majority of the globe, over 200 countries and territories, which we have plans to launch coverage of Canada and Oceania and even Antarctica next month. And that'll bring us actually to full global coverage. So for those of you who've been following ACLED's work for a while, you know we started as an African data set, slowly expanding to different geographic regions. So we're quite excited to be able to be fully global very soon. So I often hear people ask why different data projects, especially global ones, might depict different trends in the same context, especially if both purport to report on trends around the same thing, like political violence, then why one data set might say violence is increasing, for example, while another might say it's decreasing, or that the geography of violence might look in two different ways across these two different lenses. And while a number of things can, of course, feed into these distinctions, The unit of analysis, typology, definitions, catchment, all these things, of course, impact that. But we have really found that sourcing specifically is the most important, where different data projects get their information from really drastically impacts how different data projects in turn depict a certain context. So the questions then usually followed by whether a higher number of sources is better than, or what types of, or what sources of information might be best. And we find that the number of sources itself doesn't necessarily guarantee that data are necessarily, quote, more reliable. All sources contain some form of biases and specific focuses. And so the mere inclusion of more sources, just for the sake of more, simply just reproduces those biases, but on a larger scale. So for example, international media outlets based in the US might report on only certain types of events abroad, like those that are high casualty, or the types of events that their readership wants to read about, or events that happen in certain areas, like those areas that their foreign correspondents can easily access. So adding 5 more sources that look quite similar in scope to that initial source will really do very little to broaden coverage. The new sources will probably just end up reporting those same events. And so the reliability of coverage isn't really bettered by simply upping the number of sources. So we have actually found that it's most important to remember that countries are unique in both their conflict and also in their media landscapes. And this means that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to a sourcing strategy. Each context requires its own unique sourcing profile that takes into account all the distinct nuances of that specific landscape. And so in this vein, we have found that what does make sourcing more reliable has consistently been prioritizing local sources. So relying on local media, especially in local non-English languages, and then relationships with those who have local knowledge and local expertise. So of course, curating so many distinct profiles with each accounting for nuances and specific conflict media landscapes in each context, that presents its own unique challenges to data collection. It'd be a lot easier, for example, to just scrape a set list of English language news sources and be done with it. But we found that doing that misses so much of the dynamics that are happening on the ground, which is why we've really tried to take a different approach at ACLED to try and get closer to capturing those local dynamics. So at ACLED, we draw on information from thousands of media sources. As I mentioned, we prioritize local media, like national newspapers, local radio, in local languages. ACLED researchers, like I mentioned, are based around the world, and they have local language knowledge, allowing us to cover media in over 100 different languages. While we don't crowdsource, we do increasingly use specific trusted new media sources. So like vetted Twitter accounts, like those of journalists, or trusted Telegram channels. And we've found that to be really useful, especially in spaces where the media environment can be quite closed. We draw on in-depth reporting that comes from international organizations like Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, the UN, especially as those types of reports can offer more granular information from hard to access spaces. And then importantly, we really benefit from partnerships with local conflict observatories and organizations, which can be really especially crucial in accessing unique information. And we have a number of such partnerships, over 50 of them around the world. And I've included a few examples of these on the slide, but the representatives from whom are joining me on this panel. So we have Carlos Mendoza on the panel from Dialogos, which is a Guatemalan think tank and innovation lab that collects data from public sources and transforms such data into useful information for policy analysis and policy recommendations. They collect information from a number of Guatemalan public institutions, including National Police, prison system, immigration institutions, National Institute of Statistics, and more. They're tracking information, including the date, location, information about victims, and further details about violent events. At ACLED, we really benefit greatly from the data that Dialogos share with us. The level of detail that they collect around each incident allows us at ACLED to determine which of those events in turn meet ACLED's threshold for inclusion, given that ACLED and Dialogos, while very closely aligned, have different mandates, and so therefore we have different catchments for coverage. The information that they collect helps us capture events that are often unreported by traditional media sources. The majority of these events capture armed clashes or violence against civilians involving gangs. In fact, nearly half of our Guatemalan coverage at ACLED draws on information from Dialogos, with the majority of these events not being reported by anyone else, really underlining the important work that's being done at Dialogos. Further, in addition to the important data collection they're doing, they also conduct cutting edge analysis, which has really helped our team to have an even better understanding of the Guatemalan context. Hussein Abdullah is with us on the panel from Americans for Democracy and Human Rights in Bahrain, or ADHRB, which fosters awareness of and support for democracy and human rights in Bahrain. With their advocacy work, all based really crucially on the important documentation and information collection work that they undertake through interviews and testimonials on the ground from local media and more. At ACLED, we received weekly reports from ADHRB that help to highlight trends in repression with a focus on abuses that would otherwise really remain out of the spotlight, like abuses in prisons, which are often neglected by other sources. So specifically at ACLED, we recently launched a new pilot project in which we're tracking religious repression and conflict, specifically in 7 MENA region countries, including Bahrain. As a part of that project, we've been tracking religious repression, such as instances of judicial harassment, religious discrimination, or the prevention of religious practice, in addition to our usual coverage of political violence and demonstrations at ACLED. And ADHRB's ability to shed light on prisoner abuses, discrimination, prevention of practice, all of this has been really integral in our ability to be able to track such trends in Bahrain as a part of that pilot project. In fact, nearly 18% of our Bahrain coverage for the ACLED Religion Project comes from ADHRB, with some of those events not being reported by any other sources than ADHRB, pointing to the really important work that they're doing. I'll speak about Kareem Murad, who will hopefully be able to join us too. Is going to be joining a panel from the West Africa Network for Peacebuilding in Sierra Leone, which is a national network of CSOs that work towards preventing conflict and building peace in Sierra Leone. They collect information on demonstrations, security, and criminal events alongside updates on the pandemic via a network of reporters based around the country. At ACLED, we really benefit from not only their weekly reports that describe the latest trends and events, but we also benefit from their specific incident reporting from their network of reporters, which includes detailed reporting of incident locations. Their tracking of mob violence, demonstrations, and attacks specifically are especially useful in supplementing ACLED's coverage, especially given that these types of events are often not reported by other sources because they're seen as minor. In fact, nearly a third of our coverage of Sierra Leone over the last 5 years comes from WANEP, with many of these events not being reported by any other sources. Furthermore, in addition to the incident reporting, the background information and contextual knowledge that they're also able to share with us has been really useful to our team of researchers at ACLED focused on Sierra Leone, helping them to understand the social and political context in the country, especially when compared to some of our other sources of information in the country. WANEP really provides the best coverage of the whole territory of Sierra Leone, really allowing for a holistic view of the country. And then last but not least, we have Raj Kumar Buddha on the panel from the Collective Campaign for Peace, or COCAP's Nepal Monitor Project. COCAP is a national network of peace and human rights NGOs. One of their collect information on violence and demonstrations in Nepal based not only on information from online news portals, but also via a team of researchers based across several districts in Nepal who are able to collect information from local publications that are only published hard copies that remain otherwise inaccessible to most outside of Nepal. Coverage of these local publications results in the reporting of events that are otherwise unreported by national and subnational publications that don't have the capacity or the readership to report on these incidents. But importantly, these types of incidents are often violence against women or Dalits, or over allegations of witchcraft, demonstrations at ward levels that are rarely reported on by other sources. So their coverage is really incredibly important. Overall, the Nepal Monitor Project contributes to nearly a third of all of ACLED's Nepal coverage in some way, with a considerable proportion of these events not being reported on by other sources that are accessible to our researchers, meaning that without COCAP's work, they would have likely been missed. So given the incredible importance of the work COCAP does as part of the Nepal project, I'd be remiss to not mention that the project may soon be coming to an end without further funding. While their work has already been scaled back as a function of limited funds, it will soon need to be scaled back entirely without identification of new resources to support the work. So if you're affiliated with or know of any potential resources to pursue, I'm sure that Raj and his colleagues would be quite eager to hear more from you. So with that, I'd like to hand things over now to the other panelists. Each will discuss the work at their organization in a bit more detail, shedding light specifically on their data collection and the challenges that they face. My hope is that we'll then leave a little bit of time at the end to open up the floor to any questions the audience might have about the work of any of our organizations or about data collection strategies more largely. So without further ado, I'll hand things off to Carlos first to start us off by discussing the work in data collection and Dialogos.
Thank you very much. May I share the presentation? Okay. Let me know if you can see the presentation. Okay, perfect. So let me present a little bit myself. I'm Carlos Mendoza. I am the coordinator of the Regional Observatory on Violence for Central America. This is one of the main projects at Dialogos, which is a Guatemalan think tank and innovation lab. And we have this project since 2018. And our main focus is homicides, people injured by violence, and extortions, which is one of the major problems in the region, specifically in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. And here I'm gonna explain some of the challenges we are facing in terms of data collection and analysis on those specific types of crimes. Basically, we have two main problems. One is the quality of the data, and the other one is actually access that data. Guatemala is a very interesting case in the region because, as you may know, Guatemala is among the most violent countries in the world. But the good news is that since 2010, we begin to go in the opposite direction with a reduction in the quantity and the rate of homicides during the last 11 years, with a specific and very important decrease in 2020, due in part to the restrictions due to the pandemic. But last year we faced an increase of 9% going up between 21 and 2020. That's the type of information we follow, and basically because we were one of the main organizations who find out that we were in the downtrend. People always ask if we believe in the data from the police, because that was the main source from our data. So because people didn't believe that we were going down, we start following the other two sources that we have, which is the vital statistics from the Institute of Statistics, who have the deaths due to aggression, and the INASIF, which is the Forensic National Institute, who also have their own data on crimes. So we start to follow the three sources for purposes of trusting the main source, which is the police, which is the source that have more information for our analysis. And one of the other sources, which is the Forensic Institute, also allow us to follow this indicator, which is a short-term indicator that allow us to give some feedback to policy, specifically prevention and security of citizens, giving some, feedback to the policymakers. This is the type of analysis we do. But what I want to tell you is what is the origin of the data, what are the main problems or challenges we face. So here we have the three sources. The police, the basic origin of the data is the crime scene. They took data from victims and suspects and the murder itself. And the other source is the Forensic Institute. They basically have data from the moment they do the autopsy. And the other source, which is the National Institute of Statistics, they basically got all the data from the report of death that they have, and it specifies if it was a homicide, an accident, suicide, or natural causes. The problem to have access to these sources is basically that the police in Guatemala do not have a space in their own website where you can access directly the data in any form. It's not possible. So you have to use the Act for accessing public information. So we do every month, or every time we need a specific data, we fill the form and send the form, and we wait 10 days to get the information. And finally, after some years, they are providing in a Excel spreadsheet. In the past, they only give you the PDF, so we have to transform and all the problems related to PDF formats. That is the case of INASIF. INASIF, they do have a website where they upload the data, even by day. That's why we have the short-term indicator. But if you enter the INASIF website, you will find the PDFs. So we have to transform in a open data format. And the third source, which is the Statistics Institute, they do publish the database, but they do it after a year of the events, right? They collect data from police, from the INASIF, and they clean up the data. They put it in a structure that you can use, but you have to wait a year to get that data set. So they also publish the homicide, the autopsies, and the deaths by aggression in that format, but it's not for an observatory. It's very important to have access on regular basis, monthly or even daily basis. So basically the summary here is that it's very difficult to have a complete time series and complete the data sets. Some fields are missing, like in the case of ACLED. It's very important for ACLED to know the motives of the crime, right? What happened, what was the context, the circumstances. But usually more than 40 or more than 60% of the fields of every observation doesn't have that field. So it's very difficult to interpret the data. They usually don't follow the international standards like the UN statistics manual, for instance, or the World Health Organization classification of causes of death. They don't use it properly. the big problem for us in Guatemala is that the police doesn't update their numbers. They have an account for deaths, an account for people injured by violence that might death afterwards, but they don't follow those people. So that's a problem, and that is part of the difference with the data from INASIF, which finally got the bodies from those murders. And we usually look at the case of El Salvador, where they have reached an agreement within the three institutions, the Attorney General, the Forensic Institute, and the police, to every month revisit the numbers and have an agreement on those numbers. And the other problem is that, as you know, for other types of crime, is very important, like extortion, to know the victimization, the real victimization of those numbers, and not only the numbers of people who went to put a claim for the extortion. So we lack periodical surveys on victimization and perception of violence. We don't have open data portals for this, only the Statistics Institute, but it's not on time for our purposes. They usually don't listen to the data users, so we always give some constructive feedback, but it's like talking to nobody because you don't see changes in their way to address the problem. Usually we rely on informal networks to access some of the data. That's the more effective way, because if we use the Access Act for public information, sometimes they will say we don't have that data, and they are not. They don't have to give data that they don't have, of course, but we don't know if they have it or not. So that's one of the problems. There is not a culture in Guatemala public servants to be data driven in terms of policy design, analysis, monitoring, and evaluation. And they usually report what they do, but not the results or the impact of their policies. And I'm basically ending with some reflections on one of big problems we face, because those, but the problem is the political issues, basically instability and corruption in the country, because corruption requires impunity. Impunity doesn't need transparency. They don't want accountability. They don't want NGOs that are looking for the data. And we usually have some alliances with UN or the Organization of American States, but because the nature of those organizations, they need to work with government directly. And if government doesn't like what we say with our analysis, we basically are out of the game, because they don't want to work with us because government doesn't feel comfortable with us. So that's what I wanted to share with you. I'm out of time, and you can visit our website and download our reports and the data on homicides, injured people, and extortions if you want. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Carlos. That was really informative. And I think we can hand it off to Hussein next, though I wanted to just take a moment to say welcome to Kareem. Glad that you're able to get through the technical difficulties and join us. Kareem joins us from Wanep, Sierra Leone, so we'll hear from him after Hussein. Hussein?
Thank you very much for having me, for being part of this excellent, important panel. ADHRB started as a student group in early 2000, and our main focus at that time was to basically create some kind of pressure group or advocacy group to push issues of democracy, human rights, women's rights, economic justice, labor reform in the bilateral relationship between Bahrain and the United States. As the organization grew, we graduated, we went into increasing our mandate to focus not only just on Bahrain, to focus on the rest of the GCC countries, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Oman. Talking today, I'll be limiting my conversation on Bahrain. My name is Hussein Abdullah, and I'm the executive director of ADHRB. Before I talk about how do we collect the data, or how do we vet that data and create a streamline or a process where we then use this data in some kind of project or advocacy or a desired outcome that will have some sort of policy from policymakers, not just only in the United States, but in Europe and other worlds. It's important to realize that our work is considered in Bahrain by the legal authorities to be illegal, to be punished by law. So the challenge we face from the get-go, from the beginning, is working in a country where the government is basically looks at you not as a partner or a civil society organization that probably will critique your work, but look at you as an enemy, and then punishes people associated with you because under their law, it's illegal what you're doing. So in Bahrain, to criticize the government, to talk about torture, or to basically discusses the issue of culture of impunity in the country, and say, Minister of Interior been a leader in this position for 10 years since or been in position since the uprising, the Arab Spring in Bahrain, that took place in February 14, 2011. And he's responsible for some of these crimes that took place under his leadership. You could be basically arrested, prosecuted, and thrown in prison for numbers of years. For a tweet in Bahrain, you go to jail for 10 years. Anything that is looked upon as critical of a government, you're hammered with these anti-terrorist law. And those who work in the Middle East, especially in oppressive countries, understand that these laws are created to go after civil societies, or to go after non-government organization or independent activists. So the question comes to us and to many people who work in countries like Bahrain. Okay, what to do? So you come up with these creative ways. Of course, you cannot go and open an office in Bahrain and have staff holding your name and business cards and going around and meeting with the police department, like my colleague in Guatemala who have that ability. We don't. We cannot go to the Ministry of Information or Ministry of Interior or other government agencies and extend the hand of partnership and say, we would like these data so we can basically show you where you are failing or where you need some assistance. They don't accept that. So what we rely on is on a limited number of staff, because again, you put people in danger once they're associated with you. But we rely also on citizen advocacy or citizen activism, where citizens become one of your main source of information, and not just any citizen. They are activists, especially in a country that is going through this struggle between democracy and dictatorship, like in Bahrain. So say, for example, we have an arrest that took place against an activist. So how do we go about documenting and creating or collecting data from there? We have group of activists or group of volunteers who basically are stationed in such area, because one of the issues that comes into question, how reliable is your data? If you're relying on these citizen activists who probably have some sort of training because they have your survey, they have your data collection method, but are they reliable? So you overcome that challenge by basically creating team leaders in the areas and their quote unquote, if I can call it, expertise, because they're from that area. They know the surrounding, they know the neighborhoods, they know individual X. So if we hear there was a raid in such area, we usually don't rely on an outsider. We rely on an activist who live in that area, who can basically be trusted, because that's another issue you have. The trust, you create a trust. When you live in an oppressive country like Bahrain or Saudi Arabia or United Arab Emirates, to do documentation, I don't know how I cannot make this more clear than this. You are putting your liberty in danger. You will be arbitrarily arrested, face torture. So to overcome that, the only way, or the only way at least we've seen it as credible and as safe, is to create team leaders in different areas where they can enter homes in a very normal way, because you're in the neighborhood, same neighborhood, you're visiting your neighbors, and then you document professionally using our documentation method. And then we basically can get data from there. Besides citizen, we also rely on lawyers. They have some kind of immunity in Bahrain. Not great, but better than a citizen advocate. And lawyers, fortunately, in Bahrain has realized that they cannot win majority of their cases for their victims or for their client through the court system, but they can through international advocacy. If they cannot get them released, they at least can make the unpleasant time for them, whether it's torture, enforced disappearance, stopping government pension, or stopping government services for their family members as a retaliation. They at least can lesser that. At least they can stop that. So it's not complete freedom, but at least is not a misery that is ongoing. So lawyers become another source where we have direct access to court documentation that we would not have it otherwise. As a public, we don't have that access to case records, to the arrest record, to what the prosecution is arguing. And that give us an excellent inside information that we will not have it otherwise if we did not have this information or this relationship with the attorneys in Bahrain. Family members are a great source. Now, with family members, we have to be very careful because emotion is involved. Sometimes, unfortunately, we have some exaggeration that we need to be careful of again, and that comes in the vetting part. Because some family members think when they basically tell you information that is exaggerated, or they go more colorful, if I can put it without being too critical of family members, that will help their son or daughter or loved one case. That's an issue we face, I'm not going to say majority of the time, but good numbers of time. And that's where we put in a vetting process, where we have certain questions to make sure, was there an arrest warrant? People who came, were they wearing uniform, what type of uniform, where he was taken, color of the car, was it an official car or a civilian car? When we go through these vetting process, we can basically water down some of the inflation if there are any. Of course, social media is an excellent source, but again, social media is another challenge. Given an example without mentioning name, a well-known activist, she's doing an excellent they're doing an excellent job in documentation, but they became the target of the government to basically make them not credible or attacking their credibility. So what happened, an information spread through that activist that a certain individual has passed away in the prison due to ill treatment. And that information spread. Now, we have a policy. We just don't go and take that and document and spread. We basically verify. But unfortunately, many sources have not verified that information because the individual is very credible. And they are still credible. I mean, they were victim of this vicious attack against civil society in Bahrain. So that's an example. That is one of the challenges that we face. Or you have these made up victims that approach you and try to document their cases, but then there is no paperwork, there is no paper trail, there is no law enforcement. The team leader in that area that we have is cannot corroborate that information. So if ADHRB or organization in our place don't have certain vetting process, they will have serious problem with their credibility. And the truth or how effective the data collection methods is. So without the data collection, without documentation, we will not be able to have credible reporting, or we will not be able to do an advocacy. But the effectiveness of data collection, that's what made us into, I'm not going to call, what made us into an advocacy group that have some effect on policy. And we don't just share this information. Of course, we are proud to be partnered with ACLED, but we also create advocacy project and policy project that does not only go to the US government, but also around different European countries. One of them is the European Parliament. If from the get-go, we came to an understanding or conclusion without effective documentation or data collection method, we will not be able to do an effective advocacy. So for an organization like us to be able to have a strong voice on any policy discussion or any government agency decision-making process, we have to have strong documentation. Magnitsky Act, right now, it's basically been the discussion of not only the United States right now, as you know, it's also implemented in Europe. Many NGOs have an issue when it comes to Magnitsky. They know who are basically the violators. But the problem is, if you don't have reliable data with some kind of paper trail or some kind of documentation showing where violations took place, how violations took place, you will not be able to submit successful complaint against government officials who are involved in corruption, torture, other grave human rights violations. In conclusion, I know time is moving. ADHRB and NGO in our place in oppressive countries cannot rely on local media, although they are a great partner in other countries. So that my message is, data collection is a very challenging process in Middle Eastern countries. For Bahrain specifically, people have been arrested. People's life have been basically upside down because they were involved in data collection. You don't have an independent media that you can go to and verify some of them for information. Government is completely secretive. Of course, there is a propaganda. Everyone who's a member of a civil society is a terrorist. So that's the information you get from the government. So you have to rely on creative methods. And even those creative methods, if they give you flow of information, if you don't have a strong system of vetting, your data and your documentation will be questionable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hussein. That's really, really insightful. Karim, I'm happy that you are able to, you're here now and your video is working. Are you ready to go next? I think you're on mute now. I did give a small introduction to one of before you joined, but we will benefit greatly from you going more in depth to the work you're doing. Karim?
Yeah.
Great.
Hello everyone. I want to express my honor and how happy I am to be invited to this conference. I am Karim Mohamed Murad. I am from the West Africa Network for Peacebuilding, based in Sierra Leone. We are present in 15 West African states. We are in partnership with ECOWAS, African Union, and quite recently, ACLED. And ACLED has been a very, 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 very important institution in terms of support in collecting our data and doing other research work. I'm happy that we have this collaboration with ACLED. I also bring you greetings from my boss, who is the network coordinator, Dr. Isaac Mahoy, who would have loved to be part of this meeting, but she's unavoidably absent. For us in OneApp West Africa, Sierra Leone, we have engaged in so many platforms, in so many research and data collection projects. We have one major one that I am heading, the National Early Warning and Response Strategy, which is geared towards looking at the signs, the symptoms, and the factors that eventually, if not taken into cognizance, if not corrected, will lead to violence. And you know, Sierra Leone being a post-war country, a lot has been happening just after the war, be it in politics, be it in the crime, be it in women, peace and security, be it in youth activities, be it in governance and politics and all of that. So what we have done in terms of gathering our own data, we have developed a template, which I will share later. In that template, we've been able to classify our data into 5 thematic areas. We have what we refer to as the organized crime and violent extremism. First of all, before going that, in gathering this data, we go to our communities. We establish community connections. We train community monitors. We map out the most conflictual villages, towns, and communities in Sierra Leone. Be it election violence, be it gang rape, be it violence against women, be it issues of SGBB and all other issues that may lead to conflict. So we develop a community platform in which we train community monitors. These community monitors are in their societies, they understand their languages, they understand their cultures, and they understand the societies in their communities. So we give them training, we give them equipment, and we give them finance in terms of reporting. So they monitor the situations in their communities, they report to us. That means they gather the happenings, they gather the data in their communities and send it to us. So we classify that data. If the information that comes in is about the high rate of murder in a particular community, we classify that particular crime or that particular incident into organized crime and violent extremism. You understand? Then if there is also a high rate of rape, especially rape involving minors in that community, that monitor is also be able to document that information, capturing the victim's name, the victim's age, the area, and all other necessary details that we might need. Having secured that data, we analyze that data in the office with a group of colleagues, experts that are also trained in analyzing data of early warning. Then we populate that data into our template. For example, I said we had violent crime and organized crime and violent extremism. Under that, we have murder. We look at the situation surrounding the murder. We look at what happened. We look at what ignited even the action. We document that. Then we look at issues surrounding theft, breaking into people's houses, using guns, killing people for their property, and all of those things. So we also categorize all those incidents into the organized crime and violent extremism chart. After that, we were very curious of the location. We were very curious of the casualty. We were very curious if there is any property damage or if there is any other population affected. Or we also look at the coping mechanism. If there has been a response from the government or from the police or from any security forces or from any stakeholder in that community that have stepped in to, in one way or the other, try to solve that problem. Because our government cannot go anywhere and they cannot be anywhere. We have civil society, and the work we do have to go down and help bring out some of the things that they are not seeing. So having said that, we come down to women, peace and security. All issues surrounding against women, be them policies by government, like the 30% quota of women, representation in all forms of governance and decision making, rape, HBB, and domestic violence, and all of those. Because in certain communities in Sierra Leone, especially in the northern part of Sierra Leone, wife beating, domestic violence is greatly in the increase. So we equip our monitors wherever such things arise, we send them, get the information, send it to us, and we put it to the right form. From there, we have what we refer to as governance and democracy. This talks about the politicians. It talks about the politicians, the way of governance in our country, the behavior of governance issues of corruption, illegitimate sacking based on tribalism, based on partyism, or based on any other sentiment that might not favor a sitting government, that may tempt that sitting government to at least wanting to relieve some people of their duties illegally. So we also look at, because those are all signs of conflict. Those are all potential signs of conflict, and conflict develops through those stages. You can look at those things and just flout them, but the people agreed might have their own people that depend on them. The people that depend on them might also have their own friends somewhere. They might organize guns, they might organize any other things, and boom, before you know it, conflict erupts. You know, so that is why we as an organization have decided to put all these things in place so that we can inform policy. We inform the security sectors. We inform the Office of National Security. After putting all this data together, we inform the Office of National Security, we inform the police, we inform the Office of the Vice President, we inform ECOWAS, we inform African Union, and we also inform ACLED, because we have a weekly data analysis template that we share with ACLED. And I also have to share with you, I have prepared the annual data timetable that I also have to send to you to look at the percentage of each thematic area, whether it has risen or it has reduced, so that you can also study it and advise on how we can move on. We also look at issues of environmental security. In 2021 in this country, we've had a host of fire incidents, be it from leakages of electricity, be it from malfunction of electrical apparatus, be it negligence of people using their cooking machines or whatever. So we also look at that, because the people that are affected when there is a fire outbreak are numerous. I can give you an example of a certain place called Susan's Bay. In Susan's Bay, there was a huge fire that engulfed that whole place. It left over 500 to 600 people dead. Yeah, it left over 500 to 600 people homeless. You understand? The government cannot immediately address those issues, and the government cannot immediately know the causes and reasons why these things are happening. So we document this incident, we put them together and tell and inform them that this and this and these are the causes of what happened. Look at also what happened somewhere in Freetown. There is a neighborhood in Freetown called Wellington. There was a tanker leakage of fuel. People rushed to that. People rushed to the tanker and they were scooping that fuel. Never mind the driver advising them, telling them that you should keep up from this. It is very, very dangerous. It is potent. It can kill you. But because of poverty, because of the expensive nature of fuel, and because of the ignorance of the people in disaster management activities or in emergency disaster eruption activities, people rushed into that scene, and a whole lot of people died. And I tell you, most of the people that lost their lives were people coming from their offices to their homes, because it happens along a highway, the highway that links the capital city and the outskirts, Waterloo, you know? So most of the people that died, they died out of the inferno and all of these things. So if we leave these things untouched, and unaddressed, I think we are going nowhere as a country and as a society. So we don't just accept, coming also to the analysis, to analyzing the data, we don't also accept every junk that every monitor just say. You know, in Sierra Leone, we are highly, highly politically charged. And with these are two political parties, some things can happen in one member of a political party that might not interest or might be in the favor of our monitor. Maybe the monitor happens to be the opposite political party. So the way that monitor sends in that report, we also have to look at the details of that report. We look at the sincerity of that report, and we also look at the genuinity of the message. So we contact stakeholders as well. The ONS offices right across the country, we have their numbers, we have their contacts. We contact them so that they can ascertain and justify the incident. Yeah. So when that incident reaches us, we analyze it. After making all calls, now we decide to say, okay, this is a security threat, and this is not a security threat. This is just a natural phenomenon, and this is not a natural phenomenon. So at the end of the day, we can able at least to bring out those factors, those signs that if not taken into consideration, not addressed by the government, might lead to violence. Because at the end of the day, we are longing for a peaceful coexistence in Sierra Leone. We are longing for a peaceful cohesion, and we are longing for building better bridges of peace, you know. So in a whole, this is what we do. I can also tell you there was a time when there is, we have illegal miners in this country, and most of our people up country depend on irrigation rivers for domestic use, for water and for everything. So there was a time also when there is this, is a Ghanaian mining company that was mining along a very, very major river. And that river cuts across like 4 communities. And they were dumping the toxic. Of the mines into that river. The river flows to the other community where the people depended on that water for food. People scoop that water, cook with it, eat, and wash their clothes. After several weeks, there was a very, very outbreak of cholera and diarrhea from that side. So government was finding it very difficult. How does it happen? What is happening? We were able to give the information to government that it was the activities of these mining companies that were depositing these toxics into these rivers that are causing this thing. So their licenses were confiscated and they were stopped from mining. So we have a whole range of issues that my time cannot allow me to at least bring out here. But I will share our template, our incident report template, and you see all our thematic areas. We see the work we're doing and how these incidents are addressed and reported. So I want to thank ACLED for this opportunity. It's my first time, but I appreciate it so much. I'm very happy that you have at least contacted OneUp to be on this platform, and it's an international platform. I appreciate my brother Hussein Abdallah and Mendoza. You guys are very good speakers. You have educated me today, and I hope tap in from your expertise and experience. Thank you.
Thanks for all the kind words, Karim, and that was really interesting to hear about the work you all are doing in Sierra Leone. So without further ado, last but not least, Raj, if you can speak a bit about COCAP's work and the Nepal Monitor Project, and then we'll leave just a bit of time at the end for Q&A. You can begin posting your any questions that you have, though. We'll just start collecting them and we'll be ready to address after Raj. Go
okay.
Ahead.
So thank you, Rudabe. And good evening, everyone. So it's a great pleasure to be here with you all. So my name is Rajkumar Buda, and I work for COCAP, so which is a national network of 43 peacebuilding organizations in Nepal. So at COCAP, I basically oversee the Nepal Monitor project. So I have prepared a small presentation. Let me. I hope you all can see my screen.
Yeah.
I will start by going into a little bit of background about Nepal Monitor. So the official tagline of Nepal Monitor is called a COCAP conflict prevention initiative supported by PBI. So Nepal Monitor was originally established as open source crowdsourcing tool based on Usahidi by Peace Brigades International. So Peace Brigades International is basically an international organization that supports the work of human rights defenders in different countries. So they basically have field offices, field offices in. They work quite actively in South America, and they also had field office in Nepal around between 2006 and 2015. So the Nepal Monitor Initiative was established by Peace Brigades International. So the basic idea, the purpose behind establishing this Nepal Monitor Initiative was that, at the time, the Peace Brigades International, people who were working in Nepal, found it very difficult to come across, properly collected, organized information regarding threats and attacks against human rights defenders. So they basically wanted to provide a platform where, people could easily share information regarding threats and attacks against human rights defenders, and also other security related incidents. So they basically wanted to encourage to provide a platform for crowdsourcing this kind of information. The Nepal Monitor platform based on Usahidi system also comes with inbuilt feature through which it can send daily email alerts and SMS alerts to people. So PBI also wanted Nepal Monitor to be a platform to alert people about security incidents happening in their area. So this is regarding the background. So at the moment, our objective with Nepal Monitor is basically focused. So we want to democratize access to data and information related to political governance and economic related tensions. So if you look at the scenario of Nepal, and let's say if you want to do a research on political violence, I think you will find it very difficult to come across data on this property collected data on this kind of this themes. Because there aren't many organizations that are actively and properly collecting data. So yeah, we want to promote access to this kind of data. So we are basically, through our work with Nepal Monitor, we are basically trying to produce open source reliable data on violence that can be freely used by everyone for, let's say, different purposes, to support early warnings, to do research, and so on. We also want to promote data-based and evidence-based advocacy, and also enhance the capacities of human rights defenders and civil society members to utilize data in their advocacy work. So, and most importantly, I think, from the Nepal Monitor Initiative, we want to promote better understanding of conflict and violence dynamics in Nepal. I'll briefly take you through the timeline of our mapping work. So, like I said, the Nepal Monitor platform itself was established around 2013. But it officially started as a formal project in 2015. So in 2015, Peace Brigades International handed over the Nepal Monitor platform to COCAP. And that's when the partnership started. So around that time, Nepal Monitor's data collection, or let's say the mapping work, was mostly focus around collecting data on human rights abuses and threats and attacks against human rights defenders, especially because PBI was working mostly to support the work of human rights defenders and with human rights defenders. They also wanted the platform to be Nepal Monitor to be a platform for sharing and like reporting human rights related abuses. So in 2016, we were approached, COCAP was approached by the ISA Foundation. So they wanted to do work related to violence monitoring in Nepal. So they did an assessment, they did an assessment of if there are any organizations doing something similar and if there is like room for collaboration. So they found Nepal Monitor, right platform, let's say, right platform to like build on. So that's when we started our violence monitoring work. So as a part of the violence monitoring, we broadened the scope of the mapping, and we started to capture, data on more thematic areas. So while we were focused mostly on like human rights related, human rights violations and threats and attacks against human rights before 2016, after 2016, we've we broadened to capture data on other areas like political governance and economy related context and like tensions. So we also, as a part of this, we also widened the sources we were collecting data from. So while we were mostly collecting data before 2000, we were mostly collecting data from the national, online medias and so on. After 2016, we also started looking at local newspapers, like local papers that are published only at the local levels and have, more stronger coverage of like local incidents. So in 2017, we also did a small collaboration with DRCN. So using the same Nepal Monitor platform, we did election-related violence monitoring. So in 2017, the local level elections and then the general election were held. So we were able to use a Nepal Monitor platform for monitoring election-related violence, and we also produce a lot of analysis updates, and different reports regarding the election-related violence in 2017. So in 2017, so in 2020, we also were able to extend the Nepal Monitor platform. So we basically created a separate, separate dashboard specifically to monitor civic space in Nepal. So, how were the police reporting to different demonstrations, whether people have been able to freely exercise their right to peaceful demonstration and freedom of speech and so on. So we basically created a separate dashboard extending the Nepal Monitor for monitoring civic space in 2020. So for this, we did collaboration with Civicus. The COVID pandemic happened in 2020. So as we all know, so the COVID pandemic created a different, changed the dynamics of violence and social discordance in Nepal. So also to capture this kind of incidents, we also created another dashboard based on Nepal Monitor. So I can share with you the link of this dashboard later. Yeah. So this is regarding the type of mapping work. So what do we map? So we map, by map, we basically mean we collect data on political context. This includes, different demonstrations, let's say clashes between different political parties and so on. So we map political context. We also map governance related issues. For example, people might demonstrate, to protest the government's decision. So if we talk about the moment, at the moment there are a lot of protests going on in Nepal because the government, the Nepal Oil Corporation recently hiked the price of petroleum in Nepal. So there are a lot of protests going on regarding this. So we also capture this kind of incidents, data and this kind of incident. So we also map resource related conflicts. This might include let's say protests and demonstrations related to hydropower project, like sand mines and so on. So we also look at human rights abuse, human rights defenders related issues. So basically the platform itself started with initially started as a like a system for capturing this kind of data, right? So we also collect data on gender-based violence, and finally we also collect and capture data on interpersonal violence. What we do not capture data on is accidents. We do not map accidents, and we also do not map criminal incidents where like violence is not involved. That might be, let's say, an example would be like theft. Yeah. So how do we collect data? So our sources, are we collect data from different sources, including most importantly the national dailies. So we looked at all the important major national dailies in Nepal. So we also look at the major online news portals, and we also collect data from the Nepal police, and INSEC is another, like one of our major data sources. So INSEC is basically the largest human rights organization in Nepal. So they have an online like news portal where they report data on different kind of incidents. Like I said, since 2016, we started looking at local newspapers from 25 districts. So we have 25 district focal persons, so who regularly send us, data from data published only in the local newspapers. So what we found is that, after incorporating these local newspapers as our sources, the quantity of the reports we were mapping like increased by almost like 48%. So what tools do we use for collecting data? So in 2019, we came across this wonderful, like system called Media Toolkit. So I think our other partners who are working on data collection will find this tool very, very, useful. So we are using Media Toolkit. So what Media Toolkit does is basically, you can feed in all the sources in the Media Toolkit, and then you can provide specific keywords. So based on that, it will monitor those sources and send you all relevant reports. So it makes the work really efficient and easy. So we also use Python. So we use Python basically for uploading the reports in our system, and also for web scraping. You also use Python for web scraping. And in the case of hard copy, local newspapers, we use OCR to digitize the text. OCR to digitize the text. And for data analysis, we use like Pandas, SQL, Excel, and Tableau, and so on. So the geographic scope of our data collection is within the territory of only within the territory of Nepal. Let's say, for example, a Nepali person was killed in India, then we do not map those kind of incidents. For us to map the incident, it has to like happen within the territory of Nepal. So the methodology is, so first of we gather all the relevant reports from all the sources, and then we like upload it into our system. After uploading it into the system, we extract different information. We record different information, like a range of information, including the tags, the location, the date, the firm, the motive of the incidents, the actors involved, and also impacts in terms of how many people were injured, if any, like there were any like fatalities, and if in the case of like, let's say, vandalism and arson, if how many vehicles were like damaged, and so on. So we collect very disaggregated granular information for every report. So we also translate every report. So basically, as you see, most of our sources are major national dailies in Nepali language. So we have to translate. We also translate these reports to English. So we do not like translate the whole report, because sometimes it's too long and too time consuming. So we do just do a summarized translation. So basically enough to be able to code the incident. So every month we export the data, export the data from the system and do quality control. So as a part of quality control, we do perform thorough analysis of the exported data set and check if there are any duplicates and errors, and and then if you find duplicates, errors, we go back to the our database and correct them. So we also do data analysis, and on the basis of data analysis, we publish different reports, trend analysis reports, annual reports, and so on. So this is the homepage of our Nepal Monitor initiative. So as you can see, at the center is a map of Nepal, and the different gradients indicate the the number of incidents in different districts of Nepal. So the darker means like there are more incidents. So at the top is the summary, monthly summary of so as you can see that there is 306 incidents. The highest number of incidents happened in Kathmandu, and also the highest number of fatality was reported in Kathmandu. So that's a basic provides a basic summary, monthly summary. And in the side you can see different filters. So using these filters, like people can do their own analysis on different topics, including let's say political violence, governance related context, and so on. So there you can filter by days, filter by province, filter by actors, and so on.
Raj, I don't want to rush you, but we're technically over time now. So if you can wrap up any last final things, and we'll try to take at least the 1 or 2 questions that have come in before the top of the hour. We have a hard stop.
Sure. So I'll go into the our challenges, right? So regarding the challenges to the mapping, not just data collection, but also the project itself. So since we collect data from mostly, let's say, secondary sources, there's also chances of importing bias from these sources, right? And then there's the challenge of verifications. Like it's difficult to verify, right? Sometimes different sources report the same incident differently, right? So it's very difficult to verify. And another challenges we have been facing is we have been facing difficulty in tracking, how, let's say, different people, different organizations are using our data. So when people, let's say, people or organizations directly reach out to us, we know how they are using. For example, there are some researchers we are using Nepal Monitor's data for research on political violence in Nepal. Also, let's say, to give you an example, we know how COCAP ACLED is using our data, right? So we are basically sharing data with ACLED, and they are feeding it into their larger data set and so on. So, but other than that, like it's kind of difficult to keep track of how Nepal monitors data is being used. So, and also there's the challenge of funding and resources. So at the moment, Nepal Monitor has no funding support. So the project basically ended in December of 2020, and we are looking for funding support. So running the system itself is also very extremely resource intensive because you have to to keep the data collection real time, you have to constantly look at the sources, and so operating the platform and upgrading the system is also a little expensive. So yeah, that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you all.
Thanks very much, Raj. And thanks everyone for your really insightful presentations. In the interest of time, I'll keep my thank yous minimal so we can maybe get to this one important question that was posed. And I know we only have about 2 or 3 minutes. So if anyone wants to speak to this, please keep it tight and we can maybe go one round robin. The question is there an evil side of MEL? How do local partners navigate data integrity and keep data free and clear of outside influence, discrepancies in translation, etc.? Are there instances where the powers that be, quote unquote, have tried to influence data that's shared by local partners and other sources that they couldn't control in the name of national security or to hide certain aspects of conflicts? Is there anything that any of you would like to speak to in that regard?
I mean, I can jump in quickly in less than a minute. The key word is vetting. Because of the area we work in, we know very well you become an enemy of the government. The government look at you as an ongoing, consistent target. So the only way you can make sure that the information you're receiving is absolute fact and has no interjection from adversaries is to keep vetting the information, is to provide, to basically relies on local human who actually have the knowledge of the area and have the ability to basically corroborate and say, yes, these incidents took place and these are all the signs. You create signs. So quickly, there was a question about what are the creative way of documentation. So without going into detail of them, video cameras of businesses in the area, especially many businesses owned by locals who cooperate. Family members who become future activists for you, medical indicator to assist the assistant from the medical sector to the prison system. If there is an increase in that, there is something going on, especially during COVID, where the government was saying there is no COVID in prison, everything is fine and going very well. Teachers and their relationship with the students, number of absence, number of psychological effect, if I call it, also counselor and psychiatrist. Of course, they cannot give us direct information of their patient, but they can tell us the areas where they see majority or there is an increase and uptick in the call. Government annual budget is another indicator. When there is influx or more money going into one sector into other, we always look at this as fishy and there is something going on. Public press releases from government hailing this or praising this or condemning this, also another sector. Finally, economic indicators. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Hussein. And that brings us to the top of the hour. So thank you everyone for joining us. I understand that this is being recorded and will be available online. And please reach out to any of us if you'd like to continue the conversation. I know that all of us can, chat about this forever. So thank you to all my fellow panelists for joining. It's been really informative having different viewpoints from all around the world. And thanks to those of you who joined us regardless of time zone.